Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a great pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to talk to you about data, and most people's eyes glaze over when I mention the word data. But from an earlier session, which some of you were at, it's really interesting to recognize that if we're going to share the benefits of the AMCH project, then we have to provide an evidence base. And evidence is around data. So data is very important, not only for that reason, but also because there's a growing realization in the industry, and it's already been expressed in the AMCH project, to share data, because there's a great deal of competitive advantage can be obtained from sharing data. So data for me is really, really important. And as Stuart has said, we have been asked to look at the Work Package 2 in the AMCH project. So what I want to do is just tell you a little bit about what the scope was, what the results are, and some conclusions and generic recommendations that may be of interest to some of you who are not necessarily connected with the AMCH project. Now, this is a bit of a tall order because if I talk about the scope of the project, undertake a wide-ranging analysis of relevant research and compile a report focused on construction productivity measurement studies and protocols. Interestingly, productivity, as we'll see in a moment, had a very wide definition within the AMCH project. So it's not just about what we normally think about as productivity, but a whole range of other performance data which was required. The result was a 130-page report, which is on the AMCH website, and it's my task to condense that to a 10-minute presentation. So you won't fall asleep, I hope. You will if you read the report, but I hope you'll stay awake for this short presentation. So what were the aims of the project? Well, the aims were to, first of all, understand what was already out there, because there's no point reinventing the wheel. Understand what tools and techniques were available for measurement on construction sites, and all the challenges that we know exist when measuring on construction sites. And ultimately, to inform Work Package 3, which was a work package which was actually going to go out and do the measuring. So it was to help Work Package 3 understand what metrics were going to be most value to the AMCH project. But you might ask, why us? Why me? Well, I'm Emeritus Professor of Engineering Management at the University of Dundee, as Stuart has suggested, and I'm also chairman of a small spin-out company, Whole Life Consultants Limited. And we have done a lot of work in the area of labour productivity, amongst other things, as you can see on this slide. And perhaps we're best known for a monogram there, which is shown on the right-hand side, More for Less, which was published in 2001, and its subtitle is A Contractor's DIY Guide to Productivity Improvement. And that summarizes work that we've done over the past 20 years at Dundee University and our understanding of the opportunities for improving labour productivity. But as I've said, this project was much wider than just labour productivity. We were asked to look at 8 different areas, and those are the areas that you can see there, and none of those are very surprising at all. And what I'm going to do is to go through each one of those shortly to show you what metrics we came up with. We decided that it was wise to take a measured approach to determining which metrics might be of most value. So we took a very structured approach, and we identified a series of criteria against which we would measure each potential metric. And that's the list of criteria that you see there. The one that's first in the list is not there by accident, because the most important thing in a metric in construction is making sure that it relates to your strategic objectives. If it doesn't do that, it doesn't add any value. So really, really important. But we identified some other criteria, which we agreed with the partners that we should use to assess the relevance of metrics that we came across in the literature. We also developed a metric scorecard. So for every metric that we encountered, we looked at how the metric was actually measured, we looked at what its merits were, and we looked at its disadvantages, and we looked at where and by whom it had been used previously. So that gave us a good feel for whether or not the metric might be the one that was of value to the AMCH project. What were the results? Well, most of them not very surprising, but one or two slightly surprising ones. What we've done on this next set of slides is to show you which results we recommended, which are the ones that have got the little AMCH logo beside them, and which we recommended but which were not adopted for one reason or another. And you can see there's no surprises on the safety slide other than the one that was not adopted, which is the percentage of tasks which are planned in advance, where there is much research and some practice to show that actually that's a crucial part of site safety, is advanced planning, planning for safety. Labour productivity, nothing very surprising there. We use our own terminology for the input in terms of hours worked, 3 measures of hours worked, the total hours paid, the available hours worked, which is the hours paid minus the unavoidable delays, such as weather and paid breaks, and then what we call the productive hours worked, which are the available hours minus the avoidable delays. And actually, if you're interested in labour productivity, it's those avoidable delays that are the key to improving productivity in labour. Quality, no surprises there. HBF star rating and a quality rating. The little calculation to the side shows you how the quality rating is calculated. And then WP3 chose to use some additional ones, which actually we mention later in a different context. But rectification, time of defects, and cost of defects are well used throughout the industry. Cost, no surprises there whatsoever. Average construction cost per plot, average construction cost per item or element of the house, and the cost of rectifying defects. Time, again, nothing surprising whatsoever there. Predictability, again, time and cost predictability, nothing surprising there. But WP3 also used the smart site KPIs. This one caused us a lot of pain. We had many debates about what we meant by efficiency, and eventually we came up with the definition that you see there. You might recognize the title More for Less, but it's about eliminating waste. But then waste has so many different dimensions that it becomes extremely difficult to measure waste across all the dimensions. Waste in labor, waste in materials, waste in packaging, and so on and so on. So as a kind of proxy for that, we thought about the percentage margin, but you can imagine that there were some commercial sensitivities around that, so we didn't go down that line. And it all became, in fact, too difficult. So actually efficiency was not measured. And then material waste, and of course, there's absolutely no surprises there at all. So those were the metrics that we recommended. We recommended in total 20 metrics, I think, and 17 of them were actually implemented in Work Package 3. That's a score of 85%, which in my university would have got me a first-class honours degree. So I guess we did okay there, just as I suspect the AMCH project will get a first-class honours degree as well from my university. But to the more generic conclusions and recommendations, we developed this structured approach, which I really recommend if you're thinking about deciding what metrics to use. Look at it objectively. I mean, there's too many assertions and not enough evidence out there for my particular liking. We looked at 250 publications, 60 websites, so a lot of work went into that. Found 70 metrics which were potentially of interest. There are a lot of metrics out there. As I say, we scored 85% on implementation. And I think you'll find that if you're thinking about what to measure and why, I hope you'll find the report, which, as I say, is on the AMCH website, will be of interest to you. And finally, our recommendations. The top recommendation, as I've already said, is the importance of making sure that the metrics reflect your strategic objectives. The idea of using a structured approach rather than a whiff of grape shot. And I have to say, in other work that we do, we see a lot of whiff of grape shot approaches. We see clients with what they call data lakes, which are full of data which is never used. So the last recommendation is, if you're going to collect data, do not fail to use it, all of it, because if you want to put people off collecting data, it's to get them to collect it and then not use it. It's a fate worse than death. There we are, 130 pages in 10 minutes. Thank you very much indeed.